think we're in a really great era now of treatment for acute myeloid leukemia. We've had significant changes in our frontline therapy in the last few years, which is really a great achievement, given that for many years the only drugs we had available to us were predominantly the anthracycline, so daunorubicin cytarabine based treatment. And in the last few years, we have seen a number of new agents come to the fore, which have just changed the landscape of treatment for AML. And this is all predominantly in frontline settings, so with the availability of venetoclax and Mylotarg, for example, in the UK, as well as CPX-351. So I think our patients are really benefiting from the change in frontline therapy, and clearly that will have an impact on the type and numbers of patients who subsequently relapse. However, I think, obviously there will still be patients who relapse, and we only have one licensed drug currently available in the UK for relapse, which is gilteritinib for FLT3 mutated AML. And so I think relapse remains an area where much work needs to be done. And the fact that we've had this change in the frontline therapy that patients have been exposed to, for example, they've received a FLT3 inhibitor at diagnosis, or they've received a BCL2 inhibitor such as venetoclax early on in their treatment, means they've been exposed to these drugs, their leukemia has seen these drugs, and this has implications for when they relapse in terms of what kinds of agents they will still be responsive to. And it is clearly true that patients at relapse may gain or lose certain mutations as a result of clonal selection and evolution driven by the therapies that we give them in the earlier lines of treatment. And so I think that does present us with some challenges in terms of trying to identify the best agents that can still work after the failure of these novel agents that we are now using increasingly. So as an example for that, in terms of venetoclax, we know that venetoclax failure, patients who end up not responding or relapsing post-exposure to venetoclax generally have a poor outlook. And although in the setting of FLT3 mutation and FLT3 inhibitors, we have midostaurin as frontline, and we have second generation inhibitors such as and beyond, such as gilteritinib, that can be used to salvage these patients. That's a slightly different scenario, but it clearly does demonstrate that where we have sort of better drugs up front, it may be even more challenging to treat those patients who are refractory or who relapse. And secondly, I think we do have a number of patients who still don't respond to our first line treatment. So that includes cohorts such as those patients with complex monosomal karyotype disease or P53 mutated AML who may not respond to any of the currently available frontline choices. And this is an area I think that's also growing, and it'll be interesting to see how patients may respond to some of the novel triplet therapies that are being used for those particularly difficult to treat patients. For example, with the use of venetoclax, magrolimab, azacitidine as new suggestions for how we could circumvent the difficulties that these patients generally experience in terms of getting control of this very poor prognostic disease up front. And so I think the future for patients who are relapsing will include a number of novel doublets and triplets. And I think what we'll need to understand is how best to sequence the agents that we have available to us. And I think much of this will be driven by diagnostics in terms of understanding the molecular profile of these patients at the different stages of their treatment course to understand which drugs should be used when. And really sort of critical to driving things forward for these patients is participation in trials for relapse. And as part of the NCRI AML relapse subgroup, we are really trying to strengthen the relapse trial network in the UK and make sure that both patients and physicians are familiar with what trials are open and available in the UK. And I think this is something that relatively recently we've tried much harder to support. And I think that is going from strength to strength. And I think, in addition, apart from being able to obviously we need to be able to work closely with pharma and to rapidly accelerate the movement of potentially exciting drugs through the different phases of trials and to bring them to the UK. What we do additionally need is sort of high quality translational research to be carried out hand in hand with those studies if we're going to really understand the mechanisms around relapse and be able to use the information from these studies to their maximum to kind of milk the information that we need to in future progress the treatments for these patients. So some of the agents that are currently in use in trials for relapse in the UK include menin inhibitors, which are being used for NPM1 mutated or KMT2A rearranged leukemia at relapse, either in combination or monotherapy, and also CCS1477, which is showing some promise, I think, and is now in combination. And then I think what is also really exciting and of real interest is the use of immune therapies, and we already saw the potential with the flotetuzumab DART, which is a dual which is a redirecting antibody, which was specific for CD123, which has shown benefit, at least in some early phase studies, as an immune therapy targeting particularly those patients who appear to have poor prognostic disease. But there are other immune therapies currently being used in the UK in trial. So other novel bispecifics, for example, direct against WT1 in the context of HLA-A2, and also a gamma delta T cell infusion study, which is achieved. So there are there's a growing body of studies across both the drug treatments and also the immune therapies that which include sort of these adoptive cellular therapies, which I think hopefully we'll be seeing more of these, likely in combination with drugs, to boost the activity of those sorts of therapies. And I hope that in the not too distant future, we will additionally see CAR T therapy for AML moving into at least a clinical trial status, hopefully fairly soon in the UK. Certainly this is something that's being studied already in countries such as the US and China, and we'll be hearing more about some of these novel immune therapies and CAR T type treatments at the coming ASH.